Well, I wanted to introduce today's talk because it's the first time I'm using a program made by EduCreations, and it's an app that has a whiteboard that allows me to draw some things while I explain. So it's going to be a bit choppy, so I hope you'll bear with me. I should thank the makers of this because they've made it available for free for the next few months to educators. The image today is to imagine that you're going into the presence of God and recognizing that our words aren't sufficient. And in doing that, the metaphor used by some in the early church was the idea of Moses going up Mount Sinai. And as we draw closer and closer into the presence of God, and as it were, we get this beatific vision of God, we recognize that our human finite eyes aren't strong enough to see, and our human finite language isn't big enough to contain God. So we're going to try to figure out then how can we talk about God while recognizing our language is insufficient. And remember, this is not just an exercise for a classroom. It's not just a mental activity for the early church. This is a part of their spirituality and their prayer life. As you draw closer and closer to God, you recognize that your words fall short until you get to the point where you literally stand speechless in awe before the living God. But then, as we step back from that prayer life and try to imagine, perhaps pastorally, how to explain this to others, well, that's when we have to figure out how to use our language in the most precise way possible. So that's what we're going to be trying to, as it were, envision in our drawings today. Hope this is helpful. Hello, and welcome to today's talk on Apophatic Theology and the Attributes of God. As a reminder, when we say apophatic, we're really talking about a negative, a negation, a saying what you cannot say, and in particular what you cannot say about God, which is odd because we normally attribute things to God, say things about God. For our jumping off point, we're going to use a quote today from Dionysius the Areopagite, or Pseudo-Dionysius, and his work, Mystical Theology. In chapter 4 of his work, he has a strange statement about God as the cause of all things, the creator of all things. And he says that God is not a body, nor has shape, nor form, or quantity, nor is in a place, which is very strange for us because we're used to thinking about God as in every place. To say in every place is to say he's all present, omnipresent. But to talk about God's attribute of omnipresence is to speak in positive terms, cataphatic terms. In thinking of apophatic, you're really saying what God is not. He's not in a place. And what I think Dionysius means is that he's not in a place the way creatures are, because God created all space, all of heaven and earth, and therefore he's not present in the same way. To help us envision this, let's imagine that we had a three-dimensional cutout of our classroom. And to keep it simple, we'll imagine that it's 10 feet wide, 10 feet tall, 10 feet deep. We, of course, want to say that God is present here in our classroom. But to say that isn't to say that God is somehow a part of the classroom. Or to say that God fills all the universe means that all the universe is part of God. That would not be omnipresence. In normal classical theism, that would be pantheism. Instead of saying that this classroom represents somehow a 10 by 10 by 10 cutoff of a part of God, we want to say the opposite. It's not that God is partly here, 10 foot by 10 foot by 10 foot of him is here. God is all here, all present. But again, it's not saying that we've cut out a slice of God. Instead, what we're saying that in every place, God is all present. Or another way to say that is God is not absent from anywhere. Therefore, while in one sense it's appropriate to speak of God as omnipresent because he is in all places, Dionysius would prefer us to speak in a more precise theological vocabulary. What we really mean is he's not absent from anywhere. This is true of all the divine attributes. When you say God is infinite, what you really mean is He is not finite. And to say that God is immortal is to say that God is not mortal. And you can do this with all of the divine attributes. What we're really saying about God is what you cannot say. Let's look at this one more way. And to think about this, let's remind ourselves that what we're pointing out by saying that God is omnipresent is He's not absent, or another way to say that would be that He is spatial, or not bulk or quantity or in a place, as Dionysius said. Now let's shift from thinking in physical, spatial terms and think instead of a timeline that goes from one moment to another moment to another moment, from one year to another. It is tempting for us to think of God in terms of being everlasting, because He always has been and always will be. But to do so, this is a positive affirmation. And this is appropriate in some ways, and this is a way in which the Bible often talks about God. But Dionysius would want us to be aware of the fact that our limited understanding of time does not limit God. Just as God is spatial and not trapped in any one space or any one room, another way to say that He is omnipresent or all-present, or better, not absent. So we do the same thing down here with our timeline. A better way to speak of God for Dionysius is to say that God is atemporal, meaning He's not in any one moment or bound by any one moment, but rather He transcends all moments and is simultaneously present to all moments, all times. Therefore God, in another way of saying this, is eternal. Notice I wrote that with that Old English A on the front, because God is not temporal in the same way that He's not spatial. He's not trapped by any one room, even though He is present in all spaces, and He's not trapped by any one moment. He transcends them all, even though He's present to all moments. In other words, you could ask God, why didn't He create the world sooner, which is somewhat nonsensical, because there is no other when to God, just like there is no other where to God. To God, every where is here, and every when is now. So what Dionysius has given us is a completely transcendent God. A God who, in our prayer life, not just in our abstract thinking, transcends all of our language and all of our concepts. The question will be for us now, what does this mean when we speak of Jesus, or God incarnate? Jesus is very finite, very human, very spatial, very temporal, and yet, if we believe that He is fully God, we must believe that in His divine nature He is also fully transcendent.